Leadership, the action of leading a group of people or an organization. Sounds simple, right? It's not, especially during turbulent times. My name is Randall Palm, and over my 20-plus year career, I've been blessed to work with some of the great leaders in the industry. I've seen many leaders take teams and organizations to new heights, while others have struggled to empower, reward, and foster a culture of diversity and inclusion. Over the past year, leaders have been challenged like no other time I can remember, from external forces like the pandemic and social injustices, to the implications of these within their own organizations, which in some cases has completely changed or accelerated their business model. As we navigate the waters of these changes, I wanted to talk with people I consider innovative leaders about their approach to leadership, how they've applied that experience over the past year, and what they've learned. Today, I talked with Bill Mayo, CIO of the Broad Institute. Bill has a long history as a leader in the Boston area, and topics ranged from his early years as a leader to dealing with and navigating through some very turbulent times in 2020. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. So Bill, welcome to the podcast. Really look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Randall. Excited to be here, and great to get to see you face to face, even if we're still electronically separated. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So Bill, why don't we get started with just a little bit about you, about the Broad Institute, and maybe we'll start with there, and we go from there.
Yeah, sure. So for those who don't know you, don't know us, Randall and I, we have buildings, I don't know, kind of diagonally across. We used to be just about attached, and then he moved all the way across the street. So now there's a building between us in Kendall Square here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Broad Institute is, as a mission, our focus is accelerating the understanding of the biological mechanisms behind a lot of diseases and ultimately the treatment thereof. We're a biomedical research institute founded through a partnership of MIT and Harvard, working closely with the local hospital groups, working closely with the life sciences and academic communities that are so much part of our area, and working closely with the tech community, whether that be Akamai, Google, Microsoft, Dell, Amazon. They're all right in the neighborhood, and we work closely with all of them as well. We're some 6,000 Brodies at this point. An interesting point I always like to make here is that only about a third of them are actually employees. We're very much an ecosystem kind of play. They might teach at the schools, they might practice medicine at the hospitals, they do their research at the Broad. They might be founding partners or IP or board members or whatever at any number of biotechs. It's really very much about the ecosystem for us. And you see that in the major programs we do. Maybe the most exciting recent of which was the launch of the Eric and Wendy Schmidt Center for Machine Learning and Biology. Really kind of go deep into that space and see what new frontiers we can open up. So an exciting kind of interesting place. It is a nonprofit biomedical research. And yet at the same time, we're in the heart of so much of what's going on here in Kendall Square. No, go ahead, Randall.
Not to say, I mean, yeah, I remember the Broad Institute, the new building went up, and everyone in Kendall Square was very envious of it at the time. And I appreciate the background. Tell me a little bit more about kind of you, Bill, your background, kind of, how you ended up there, and a little more about you.
Yeah, I think the how I ended up there might be a bit of the theme I'll play as we talk about leadership developing over the years. Because I had no idea I was going to end up here. I literally was across, if you draw a triangle between your current building and the Broad, the third vertex there would be a Biogen building. Right. I was in Biogen in 2010. I knew nothing about the Broad. I had no idea what it was. I grew up in the Boston area. I was a Northeastern computer science grad. I spent 20 plus years with the Gillette company in consumer products. And when Procter & Gamble bought us and said, why don't you come to Cincinnati? Turned out I kind of voted I was a Boston kid. Yeah. So I stayed in the Boston area, ended up in Biogen, and I had no idea what this Broad thing was. I mean, I didn't even know the life sciences thing was really going on here until 2010. Had a wonderful experience at Biogen. I got to launch 3 drugs in a couple of years there from kind of the manufacturing and the commercial side. Great experience in this neighborhood to have some launches under your belt. And then ended up at the Broad almost specifically because of what I didn't know. I used to say I kind of slipped into Biogen despite not knowing anything about the industry, because I knew supply chains in the IT context.
Right.
And I slipped into Broad despite not knowing anything about research IT, not knowing high performance compute, not knowing the things that are so much part of our identity there. But because I did know how to run an IT shop, I did know how to think the big picture. I did know how to do change management and team building and empowering a team. And that is what the organization needed at that moment in time. So, how do you end up somewhere?
Yeah.
You have the right skills that they need at the moment, even if it's not at all the headline skill of the place. And that's a very hard thing to coach somebody through.
Yeah, no, I think I've been, recently, a lot of these leadership qualities are pretty portable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, above and beyond knowing the industry and knowing, having a real understanding of the business and whatnot, a lot of, empowering people, those types of things, those are things that go with you. If you think about yourself as an early leader, maybe the first team that you managed or whatever else, or people that influenced you in terms of how you become the leader that you are today, maybe walk me through kind of your early leadership experiences and what shaped you over the last 10, 15 years, and as you've become more of a, leading a large group of people.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. I'm trying to,
some of these might have been closer to 30 years.
I know it's funny. I try to err on the side of all numbers.
I was super fortunate. Gillette was, despite the fact we spent the same amount of time at Gillette as everybody does everywhere, kind of lamenting the silly things that go on.
Right.
And yet it turned out it was such an incredible place for an early part of your career. Thinking recently through many of my influences from that time, like I literally think I ended up with every manager I ever worked for on this list. Some number of whom I still see, some have passed and I deeply miss. And yeah, so anyways, it's just a fantastic set. I guess the one I like to call out is Marie. And I don't know if she'll ever hear this or not. She's still around. We still see her a couple times a year. She showed me that you could be incredibly intelligent, have a real vision for what was going on, work endlessly. We used to call her office the den of no lunch, but work nonstop and still just be a genuinely nice person who cared about the team and cared about what was going on. It was that ability to kind of do all of it that just impressed me to no end. And I think that's what I saw in so many of the people that I worked for and with early on. And it's something I always tried to be. I could never be as bright as Marie. I got tired faster than she could work forever because she also ran. I didn't bake cookies for the team, but I emulated. Right? I wanted to be what she was for me, and what so many of my early mentor roles were for me.
Yeah,
and it keeps you grounded, right? Because it's the beauty of trying to do something and not achieving it, like still feeling like I'm not as good as that, is what keeps me grounded and keeps me working, and has my head not kind of exploding here. Look how great I am.
Yeah. I think at Akamai, being here for 20 years, there's been a lot of great leaders. I think we were talking earlier about there's a few of them that I've emulated and try to kind of be like them, and all of a sudden you realize that it's really hard to be like them, and it's because you're you. And so how do you incorporate those things that you've learned into your own leadership style? Because I think authenticity is a real key to leadership. Like if it's not authentic, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to be someone that you're not, or trying to be like, if you're, had a great leader who had a style that was more forceful than maybe yours, and you try to be forceful, it comes across empty and doesn't work. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think, maybe an observation is in there is the degree to which you've never felt you were able to be exactly what those leaders were. And I have that exact same experience.
Yeah.
I think the aha realization for me is that they weren't that person either, right? It was really about how it landed for me. It wasn't about what they were. Like how it landed for me at the right moment when I had knocked myself out on something and I brought it into Marie. And I remember this clearly at one point, brought it into her little office. We had this kind of group area that we were closed off in. And like, I was sliding into second base, like just
Yeah.
finishing this thing in the last second it was due and all that. And it was just the way she said thank you.
Mm.
And I was like, all right, yes, like she actually appreciated it. Like she stopped what she was doing. She looked at it for a minute. Thank you. This is just what I was looking for. And like just that moment of recognition. Now, who knows? Who knows what was going on for her that day? It was
Yeah.
about what happened for me.
Yeah.
So back
Yeah.
to the thing. I don't beat myself up too much for not being them because they weren't really them either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. I think recognition and just, I talked a lot about what are the really low energy, high value things, like a thank you note. Like it takes me 10 seconds to write a quick note. Hey, appreciate all your hard work. I actually send out notes probably every other Friday. So I think everybody's in a better mood on Friday. Friday afternoons to my team and say, does anybody need a quick note? And again, I get notes back, hey, this person's had a tough week or whatever it is. And just, hey, I know you're working hard. I really appreciate it. Like 4 seconds. Really low energy. And, the things I get back are, hey, made my day. Appreciate, not that I'm that important, but, just those little things that go a long way to people. I think being aware of that and being just understanding as a leader that people do really appreciate that little thank you made your weekend. And I think that's it's good to recognize that. And sometimes I think the best leaders don't always know that they're the best leaders. They don't know that their words carry a lot of weight.
Well, they're not focused on being the best leader. They're focused on what that individual needs in that moment.
Yeah.
And I like this notion of there are things that are kind of very low lift and very high impact.
Right.
And there's the other end. I've come to the favorite part of my role right now is essentially the one-on-one meetings. And I have to say, those I think have become much richer in the past year as well, as we all do it with our lives around us.
Right.
Just off camera on the side here, I got all kind of a wall of photos of ancestors. One of my habits is kind of doing my family tree related stuff.
Yeah.
And the notion that all of us have seen snippets of each other like that in a much richer way than we ever did before allows us to really go after that personal connection. And that's what you're kind of talking about in those quick notes. It's like that's a relevant quick note in the moment.
Right.
And we've had a much richer possibility of doing that in the past year. And I actually think it's one of the things that got us through it, because we have also had incredible amounts of work to do, incredible strains from all kinds of different angles. And it's been that ability to connect despite being separate. It's kind of counterintuitive. Despite being physically separate, I think we've connected much deeper. In most cases.
In different, like I know most of my folks' kids, they pop on and I know not like how they show up and they show up and we have a little dialogue and then they leave. like how so it's been to your point, man. There's with one side you lose a lot of engagement, but with the other side you gain a lot. I think it's being able to recognize that and kind of embrace it and and really build off of it allows you to have really healthy one-on-ones where maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, I have more one-on-ones now than I think I've ever have. And to your point, just how are you doing? What's going on? And having those really with life happening around them, I think can be really healthy. So maybe a good kind of opportunity to change the course, to change the topic to COVID specifically, social injustices, some of these things that is external. And we were talking about, some of the things even being a little more internal. Over the past, year or so, it's really to your point about, you have a beautiful office building down, we have this new one that we built and we were there for a month, right? So maybe walk me through COVID, kind of the first couple of months, when things really started to get bad, how you adapted, right? And I think now we're all kind of in this, okay, what does this thing look like moving forward? But maybe the first couple of weeks, first couple of months of COVID hitting, how your leadership, all those things kind of came out, with the team and how you ultimately handled it.
Yeah, it's astounding to be in a situation to already be kind of looking back. It astounds me the degree to which some of the details are just gone. It's like it's already lost to time, and it hasn't been that much time. It's been that much activity. So for us, tell a little of the story, right? So like so many, it was those early March days. We're even earlier than that. We're watching Wuhan do major shutdowns. and just being astounded at, 10 million people shut down, 80 million people shut down, if exactly what the numbers were. And somehow it wasn't clicking that is inevitably going to be here. For a little while, if you remember, like that was just a story about this amazing thing that was going on somewhere else. And it was perfectly knowable then that it was also going to happen here. Then the initial days come on. And I remember first day we knew we were getting the bug out, right? So it's probably, I forget the exact dates, like maybe the 10th, 11th, 12th of March, something like that. I get my lead team together. The 5 of us close ourselves in this one office. Well, we didn't actually close the door, but we're in this one office, full wall whiteboard all day. And that was our command center. And over 2 days, we probably spent 20 hours in that office, the 5 of us together.
Yeah.
Well, that was the most with other human beings I was going to be in the next 14 months. So we still laugh about the fact that our first instinct was to all get together. Probably exactly what we shouldn't have done.
Right.
Taking out the whole team in one day there.
Right.
And then it was all the normal stuff, right? It was like, is the VPN going to hold up? Can I buy backup appliances? Do I have to, fortunately, we didn't have to deploy a lot. Everybody was laptop based. Can I don't know, what was something, how were we going to support any number of things? And then a rapid list of projects from out-of-band network maintenance capabilities, like I said, spin up the VPN stuff, to split tunnel notion, because so much of our footprint is SaaS or G Suite or Google Cloud, or just kind of outside our organization anyways, a VoIP phone system, et cetera. So just, how can I divert traffic from even having to go through the broad? Like just an incredible long list of very detailed kinds of things. Interestingly, many of which had been on our roadmap for a long time, and we just, quote, never got to. Well, suddenly we got to them in one weekend.
Yeah. What leadership instincts kind of kicked in there that first week when when people saying, "Hey, Bill, what's going on? What are we doing?" Like what kicked in there?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure I spent enough time thinking about it, and that's one of the things we'll talk about, like what might have played differently. But I went command and control. I went like, no more of this, like we're all going to figure out what we have to do together, and we'll take a week to figure out something we could figure out in an hour because I need everybody on board, and it's going to be a group vote, and we're all going to feel good about it. It was just like, here's a list of things. Katie, please go get this team to do that and come back when that's done. Pat, go do this. Jared, go do that. It was a very command and control few days, which turned into, all right, let's open the circle in a few weeks. And by the time we were a few months in, then, the Broad had stood up a testing program. We had we had now implemented our first 24/7 on-site support in the tech space that we had ever had because of this testing program, which was doing all the nursing homes in Massachusetts. Ultimately, it got to all the state stop the spread sites. We were doing the testing now we're doing the testing for 100 plus universities throughout New England. We're doing the public school pool testing. Like the Institute was ramping up this amazing kind of testing program I haven't looked in a while, but it's probably closing in on 20 million total tests done. At times we were doing 5+% of all the testing in the country, right? 2 blocks from your building.
Right.
So like we had this amazing spin up. We had this, amazing ramp down. Everybody get used to a new way of working. Spin up this new business that at a run rate right now probably peaked at roughly equal to what the whole Institute was before it started.
Right.
It's just and then in the middle, at about 2 months out, something like that. At about 2 months out, we had a manhole explosion across town in Boston. I don't know if you guys were affected by that at all too, but it took out one of our main connections to our data center. Not our only one, but one of them to the data center. Yeah. And at that point, we were just like,
enough is enough.
It's got to stop coming.
Yeah. So what would you have done? In reflection, it sounds like that was probably the right approach. But are there learnings? I mean, it's interesting too because I feel like even having done leading people for a long time, you're faced with this. You do there's kind of a fight or flight instinct, right? That you go to. Would you not so much have done things differently, but what learnings did you take away from that experience?
I think it's hard to say. So from a distance, I say what I think I could have done differently was slowed down a little bit
Mm.
I've always prided myself in not getting lost in the moment, kind of no drama.
Yeah.
Um, and it was a moment that got a bit lost in.
Yeah.
And in the end, we did lots of things that were reasonable things to do in the moment, but a little slow down, put an extra hour of thought into something. And it
Yeah.
wasn't a moment really for deliberate action, but a
Right.
couple extra hours of thought into things, we probably could have taken 25% of the things we did off the table.
Right.
Because it wasn't really going to play that way, or it really
Yeah.
didn't, and it was probably foreseeable. Now, who knows? I'm not feeling too bad about it, in the
Yeah.
sense that, listen, how many of us sat down in those early days and said, all right, it's reasonable that I'm going to be out for 15 months. What will I do with this?
Right.
Right. That's not where any of our heads were at the time. And yet it was perfectly foreseeable.
Yeah.
Right? As a matter of fact, it's a little astounding that it's only going to be 15
That's
months.
not, I mean, I talked to the CIO of British Airways. I did this roundtable with some CIOs globally around the impacts, and they were saying, people get back to flying in 3 years. Get back to normal in 3 years. I think it's actually going to, be a little bit quicker. So certain industries were thinking this was going to be a lot longer than, 13, 15 months. I think for me, the one thing I took away from it is empathy doesn't come as natural to me, because I'm a little bit like you. I'm like, okay, there's a problem, let's go fix it. And not everyone deals with things that way. And so, talking to people and just expecting them to react to something that's the same way that I am, which is, okay, got it, let's get in a room, boom, 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 let's go. When they're like, whoa, like I'm not, like, I'm just trying to still get my arms around this thing. And I have, maybe there's a personal situation they have, or health risk, or whatever else that I'm not even aware of. Right. And so I think for me, the thing was being a little bit more empathetic. The people react to these situations very differently, and I need to be a little bit more aware of that. And maybe we another conversation on social injustices and how different people deal with different things, and what's critically important to one person might not be for the other, and how do you kind of rationalize that? And so maybe there's a little bit of a pivot here to the social injustice movement, and totally, I think, different, but really kind of leadership, stepping up and being a critically important part of dealing with it and talking about everything else. So, maybe walk me through kind of what you and the Broad Institute have done around that, because it's a very different. Well,
I think to think that through, like, I kind of have to go big scale, right?
Yeah.
And let me try something live here and see if this works.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's sort of four main themes, I think, four main events, four main happenings, if you will, all packed into 2020, which is pretty astounding, right? So maybe almost to play this. The first one going on was, of course, we have this very long-term thing going on with the climate crisis. And I don't know if anyone in the world remembers, but in January, many of us were kind of freaked out about the fires in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, and climate crisis, and oh my goodness,
California, yeah,
right. So no, the wildfires in that it was Australia, wasn't it? Like where it was like,
the whole like a big percentage of Australia
it was like, oh my goodness, climate. This 2020 is going to be the year of the climate crisis. Like, we are finally going to get serious about this major existential risk that's going on. That, sure, it's a slow roll, and sure, we have it's unbelievably transformative and complex and blah 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 blah. And we were trying to kind of grapple with, how do we think about something that big and that far away, when something that big, that existential, and not at all far away landed on our doorsteps in March. And if you look a little bit, kind of humanity's reaction was a little bit of a like, well, who can I blame for this? Can I blame someone engineering a virus? Can I blame another country? Can I blame Anthony Fauci? Can I blame someone for this? Like, who can I blame for this? And then come the summer, lands the social justice stories and kind of the injustices of what was happening at that moment. And it again landed almost just as sudden in terms of the specific actions and the specific things that happened. It's been hundreds of years in the boil.
Right.
And it was even harder for at least Americans to kind of look at it and say, gee, that was another country's problem or someone else did it. Again, it was closer to home. It's like the universe is trying to focus our minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
The universe is, you got this big thing and it could be anywhere and I don't know how to do it. You got this big thing, but it might have come from anywhere in the world. You got this big thing and it's right on your own doorstep and you own it. But at least they all had this kind of happening to us thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just to add a fourth one, and not to go political at all, but then we had the presidential election stuff. And I do remember discussions we had ahead of time saying, listen, the organization, every individual who makes up the Broad, every person we work with, every friend and family member we have has been through this mess of 2020 to this point. And those things sort of landed on our doorstep. This one you can see coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like for months in advance, everybody knew that was going to be another major stressor event on every individual in our lives and ourselves. And you could just see it coming, and there was essentially nothing you could do about it. You just had to watch it roll into town and roll out. And it's just astounding to think what we went through, what our teams went through, what the individuals, what our family members went through in that 2020. It's just such an amazing sweep. And it's still way too early for me to talk silver linings and stuff like that. Yeah. But as a leadership opportunity, as an opportunity to grow as individuals, as an opportunity to grow as an organization, as society, to be able to kind of step back and look at the themes and think about what can we actually take away from how we behave, how we plan, how we treat each other, how we care for each other, how we come to know each other, what's important in our lives. Like it was, at least for me, it landed as such a growth forcing, uncomfortable, unpleasant, everything about it hurt year.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm hopeful. At the end of the year, I'm hopeful that we're in a better place as a leader, as my relationships with my team, as my team's confidence in what they're able to do, as the Broad's understanding of its role in society, like across the board. I come into 2021 in a fairly hopeful place.
Yeah.
I don't know, is that still my naivety?
Well, I think the, part of being a leader is being a little bit of glass half full, right? And being, how do we come out of this and learn from what the past year? I mean, I don't know how else you do it.
Right.
I don't know. And so, man, there's been so much thrown our way. And I think part of being a leader is to kind of navigate those waters and be a consistent sounding board and being, offering consistent feedback and just being kind of a rock. I think it's really easy to lead. And this is not the first time anyone's saying this. It's really easy to lead when you're winning, when things are going well. It's hard when things aren't. And I think, for me this year, it's been just a myriad of things coming your way and being like, okay, how do I ensure the team at a high level is they're in as good a spot as they can be in, and being empathetic. I mean, right now, as we speak, I have a pretty large team in India, half of whom are scared to death. Like, I'm just scared to death, but like they have families, it's a whole wave right now. And to your point about silver linings, like, we're not, there's places where we're not through all this quite yet. And so there's a whole nother, okay, how do we, and other than saying, hey, we're here for you. Like, we're a rock. And I think one thing I've also taken away from this is that I think that your work can be a rock.
Absolutely.
Like work can be a constant. It can take your mind off things. And there's burnout on the flip side of that we, you have to manage. We have wellness days at Akamai where about 6 a year, just a company day off. Yeah. We had, Flex Fridays right now where it's like no internal meetings on Fridays or limited to, urgent stuff. Yeah. I think it's like, how do you create that environment where work is a place where you come and feel comfortable that your voice is heard, that you can talk to people, you can see people, right? At the same time, not burn out. And I think right now that's kind of what we're trying to manage is how do you make the most of that, and I think consistent leadership throughout that, it's if you don't have it, that's when for us, you start seeing attrition. you start seeing people unplug and just say, listen, I don't think they hear what I'm saying. Like I'm not. And I think in today's world, like I've seen it, and I think I've dealt with it, where there's still there's a lot going on with this, and people are still having a hard time. And that empathy towards that and understanding towards it, I think, is really critical as a leader, probably like you. I'm kind of, let's just go tackle this thing. And, there's not, there's a little more to it at times. There's a lot more nuance to this thing than just, let's go take the hill.
Yeah. Well, there's a line you end up
walking. Like the easy thing, the easy.
Yeah.
But I think
you end up walking this line, which is there's this notion that, we know the burden. We can see the burden we can see most of the burden that most people are carrying. But let's be really clear. We can't see all of the burden that everyone's carrying.
No.
But we can see much more of it than we ever used to. And in that regard, like lots of the facades we all put on have kind of fallen away. So that's a wonderful thing. Yet at the same time, there, in the social service world and some other organizations, and part of, like we've always talked about, the fundamental dignity of work. And work, to exactly your point, it plays that role. It can be a North Star. It can be a grounding point. It can be a thing that is still the same, kind of having work to do. You could imagine a world where we say, you know what, I'm just going to take away all restraints. You don't have to do any work. Like that, on the surface, that might be very helpful, and net, it might actually be helpful, but it would take away yet one more definition of what many people center their lives around. Like many of us are very oriented around, say, oh, what do you do? Like, we don't sit there and say, well, what I do is, we talk about all kinds of things. We tell people what our jobs are. Like that's what we do, is what our jobs are. And it's a piece of our identity that also can help people through a lot of these tough times.
No question. And as people think about retirement and whatnot, I have plenty of friends who have retired who really, there's a huge gap there because they don't have that rock, that was and work was such a big part of their, their existence and kind of define them. Right. I guess, and then Bill, maybe last thing, any parting thoughts that you've got for people listening? Maybe they're a young leader who's kind of picking up a team for the first time. Maybe there's someone who's, been, the last year has really put a lot of stress on their leadership, how they maybe make them rethink how they've done things. But any parting thoughts, and then any books, podcasts, other resources that, peers, I know both of us are involved in the Boston CIO Association, which is a great place to kind of bounce ideas off each other. Anything else that you'd recommend to people?
Yeah. So let's see, from the fairly broad philosophical end, like advice to the young leader is you don't know everything. You don't maybe even know most things. You might know almost nothing. And that's not a problem with you being a leader. A leadership isn't about what you know. It isn't about having the answer. It's about having a process, having the thoughtfulness, understanding what it takes to get through something, and sometimes having the focus and perspective. You bring focus and perspective to a problem and let the team, let the experts around you, let whomever, let it kind of organically deliver. Don't get hung up on needing every answer, because you don't have almost all of them. You don't have almost any of them. So anyway, I don't know. That's kind of that's kind of Bill's 30-year answer to new.
Well, I think the thing for me would be also, there are people like you. I've had some great mentors. I think seeking mentors out, right? Leaders like to impart their knowledge on other people, is what I've found. But you got to ask.
Yeah.
They're not like, hey, I'd love to be your mentor. It's, hey, who do you look at and say, wow, I really like the way that they conduct business, the way that they approach things. And even to your point about today's world, it's pretty easy to get someone on a quick call for 20 minutes.
Absolutely.
It's, it used to be like, let's meet for coffee in 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's healthier too, because you don't have to have 5 cups of coffee every afternoon and 4 beers every evening. It's a lot healthier than it used to be.
You got to ask, and I think that goes along. And again, people are willing to talk through how they've approached things and whatnot. I think just finding your kind of authentic self amongst all the feedback that you get, is something that I've tried to think about and impart. So, and then lastly, Bill, any books, podcasts, associations, anything that you read that kind of influences your thinking?
So I don't have anything in the kind of the management tome space. Like I spend almost no time there. My advice would be read, learn, listen broadly, like way outside of your discipline. I've been hooked on the Lex Friedman podcast for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months now. This guy publishes like 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours of material a week. It's astounding. But he does these deep interviews with physicists, philosophers, machine learning experts, mathematicians. It's just astounding to just the breadth of learning. And I understand a piece of it, but I do it while I do my other hobbies around the house or while I walk. And it opens up your brain. I'm kind of surrounded here by 1,000 books. My favorite reading over the thing is I finally read the Isaac Asimov Foundation series. Always been a science fiction guy, and I never went there.
Yeah.
I have no time for the management tomes, because for the most part they are, those are long emails that have been forced to be 150 pages long so they could be a book, and there's no more than an email's worth of nugget in those anyway.
I picked up this app called Blinkist, which is
Blinkist is the perfect answer for
that.
it
is. I mean,
you
listen to a TED Talk, you get 90% of it right that's in the book, and so I think there's ways to become a better, an efficient learner. I will say I've found that the podcast, there's a lot more time that people have to to create them, and then I'm not in my car for an hour. So it's weird, like, when do you actually find time to listen to it, maybe during when normally it was a commute or whatever it was. So
but go after that thing that you always wanted to do. It sounds a little weird to say, like, we got some time right now, but there's you got room to define a different structure than you always had. So broaden your mind. It'll make you a better leader. Anything you learn will make you a better leader. I tell you, I did Andrew Ng's machine learning course on Coursera. I took MIT's biology class because the founder of the Broad teaches it. And I'm trying to learn Swedish on Duolingo. Like, anything you learn will make you a better, more humble leader. And if that's what you're focused on.
I think this idea of continued education is also just, again, not so much leadership, but I mean, this trying to continue to improve and learn and become, take that little nugget and kind of incorporate it. And even if you've been doing this for a long time, there's things that you incorporate into, or you can try and see how it works in a meeting or whatever it is. I think that idea of continuing to reinvent
remember what it's like to learn.
Yeah, cool. All right, Bill, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Again, I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I'm hopeful everyone listening to this podcast will as well. There's a lot of good nuggets there that I think we can take away. And again, just thanks for your time today. And I wish you and your family well, and stay safe.
Thank you, Randall. I very much enjoyed it as well.
Cool. Thanks, Bill.